Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 3 Point Lead. My name is Max Loeb, Loeb's Leads. This is a Loeb's Leads podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the AFC South. I think there's some preconceived notions about this division. I think a lot of people will agree on the top. I think a lot of people will agree on the bottom. But those middle two teams, we need to talk about them. There's some really interesting talking points with each of those rosters, as well as the ones at the top and the bottom. But before we get into it, if you are new, make sure you subscribe below, especially if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe so you don't miss the next division prediction, which will be the NFC South. And make sure you like this video so it pops up on your home screen on YouTube next time you log in. If you got a hot take about this division, make sure you comment it as well. If you're listening on Spotify, Amazon Prime, whatever podcast platform you use, make sure you subscribe on there. Without further ado, though, let's get into it. Like I alluded to at the beginning, I think there's a pretty consensus, clear bottom team and top team in this division. I think you can get what I'm saying, but we're going to start with the bottom team and talk a little bit about the Tennessee Titans. I think when you look at this roster, there are some really good things. I think Will Levis is a really good young quarterback. I think you add some really nice playmakers outside of him, like Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd. I think the Tony Pollard addition also goes completely overlooked. Obviously, you lose Derrick Henry. You're going to have a different offensive identity, and the Titans are going to kind of have to embrace that and kind of adapt to that as the year goes on. But having him and Tajay Spears in a backfield that is in an offense with Brian Callahan that's going to pass the ball a little bit more. Week 6 or so, you'll get DeAndre Hopkins back. You have Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd. People forget about Treylon Burks, Chig Okonkwo. Like, this is a pretty solid team. If J.C. Latham and the offensive line can hold up, this team is going to score a lot of points. But I struggle to believe they are going to be able to consistently play defense. And I think they got a great addition in L'Jarius Sneed. Secondary help is there, but can you consistently make up for the loss of Azeez Al-Shaair? Can you consistently stop the run, especially against some of these teams in your division that are going to be pretty dynamic on the ground? And I'm not just talking about the Texans and the Colts, the Jaguars too. So let's look at their schedule. I have 5 wins for them on this schedule. I have it coming in, believe it or not, week 9 as their first win. Hosting New England, I think that's a very, very reasonable spot for them. The next week at Los Angeles. The week after that, ripping off 3 straight wins, hosting the Minnesota Vikings. Then in week 13, traveling to Washington, beating the Commanders. And in week 14, hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars and beating them. When you look at the schedule outside of that, though, they got some really tough teams. Like I said, their first win isn't coming until week 9 because they play Chicago week 1, the Jets, the Packers, the Dolphins. They get a bye, but off the bye, they play the Colts, then they play the Bills, then they play the Lions. So their 8th game in week 9 is their first win against the New England Patriots. And then after that, like, they have to play the Texans twice. They have to play the Cincinnati Bengals. They got to travel to Indy. They got to travel to Jacksonville. To me, that's a really tough schedule. I do think there's some really nice aspects of this team. We talked about Will Levis. I'll give you guys my minute breakdown of the awards within this division as well. But Will Levis is going to be awesome. I think J.C. Latham was a great draft pick. But the Tennessee Titans, to me, how consistently can you play defense outside of L'Jarius Sneed and Jeff Simmons? Can you make an impact in the front 7? Can you stop the run? I think this team's going to be playing from behind. I think they have the capabilities to keep some games close because they will be playing from behind. But at the end of the day, it all hinges on Will Levis. And I think Will Levis, coming into his second year, really his first full year as a starter, has shown some really good things. They've gotten some help around him early on in the year. Again, it really wouldn't surprise me if they go 0-6, 0-7 to start, especially not having DeAndre Hopkins. That's a pretty big loss in your offense. But the Tennessee Titans, I have finishing at 5-12, 1-5 in the division, 3-9 in the conference, 3-5 at home, 2-7 on the road, and then against teams comparably from last year, 4-0 against teams who had a losing record last year, but 1-12 against winning teams with a winning record, 0-7 versus teams with a playoff game from last year, teams that made the playoffs. So that's how I view the Tennessee Titans. Let's move to the top of this division. I think you guys can probably guess who it is. We'll move to the top right now. Moving to the top of the division, it's the Houston Texans. You probably guessed it, but before we talk anything about the Houston Texans, I want to walk you guys through my 5 major awards for the AFC South. We have a sleeper award, we have a rookie of the year award, offense and defense combined, a breakout player award, then defensive player of the year, and offensive player of the year. Let's get into those. I think it's going to be a really, really good case for discussion here. So if you agree or disagree, make sure you comment, make sure you let me know. But the 5 awards for the AFC South in the 2024 season, we will start with my sleeper pick. My AFC South sleeper of the year is Christian Kirk. I think people completely overlook this Jacksonville offense. They look at Brian Thomas Jr. as this guy with super high upside. They look at Evan Engram, especially the end of the preseason he had. They'd say, oh, he's going to be an awesome fantasy player. Christian Kirk is the safety valve in this offense. He's Trevor Lawrence's number one target. And coming off of an injury last year, I think he re-cements himself as a true number one in this offense, but also in the league. Now, rookies, it's tough. My rookie of the year in the AFC South is Laiatu Latu of the Indianapolis Colts. I'm banking on his health. The electricity, the speed, the athleticism as an edge rusher is there. If he can stay healthy, which I think he will make a huge impact on this Colts team. Now, my breakout player. This one was really tough. There's a lot of really good players going into really good systems, but my AFC South breakout player, my breakout player for 2024 in the AFC South is Will Levis. We briefly talked about it. All of these new weapons outside of him, a new scheme, a running back room that's really going to feed into the pass game. I think he could have 4,000 plus yards. I think he could be the best quarterback the Titans have had in the past decade or so, making a huge difference in this offense and, again, scoring a ton of points. Now, defensive player of the year, I went back and forth on this one so much, but defensive player of the year, sticking with the theme that the Jacksonville Jaguars are just overlooked, Josh Allen. I think people overlook the impact that other people on this defensive line have on a guy like Josh Allen. Not just Trayvon Walker. Now Eric Armstead comes in on the interior of this defensive line. Josh Allen is going to have a huge year, not just in the pass rush. He helps stop the run. He can do a lot of really good things. I think Josh Allen puts up sack numbers, but also makes his presence felt on this Jacksonville defense. Now, my offensive player of the year, I think you guys could probably guess who this is, and we're going to talk about his team very, very briefly here. But the offensive player of the year, as you could probably guess, CJ Stroud, AFC South offensive player of the year. I don't really need to say much about him, but there is one number that blows my mind. When you look at CJ Stroud from last year, dealing with injuries to his receivers all year long, not having Stephon Diggs, literally first year in the NFL too, he had just over 4,100 yards. But his season-long projection on Better Picks right now is 4,150. I cannot believe that. I think CJ Stroud could have 4,500 plus this year in this offense. And if you want to ride this with me on Better Picks, you can join with code LEADS, LEADS, and they will match your first deposit up to $250. Do not miss out on this opportunity. It is the best way to play fantasy sports, picking higher or lower on your favorite players. CJ Stroud is going to destroy this projection, and he is my AFC South Offensive Player of the Year. Now, looking at the Texans' schedule, I have them at 11-6. I have them atop this division. I do think it's closer than people give it credit for. A couple things to note. Number one, week one, I actually have them dropping to Indianapolis. I have them traveling to Indy, a little revenge game for the playoff game last year, but I have them dropping week one to Indy. The other losses, week 9, traveling to New York. Week 11, traveling to Dallas. Week 13, traveling to Jacksonville and getting the Jags off of a bye. Week 16, traveling to Kansas City, and week 17, hosting the Baltimore Ravens. Like, this schedule is no joke. I have them beating some pretty good teams too. I have them beating the Bills, the Packers, the Lions, the Dolphins. They're going to play some really, really good teams. With the Houston Texans, I think they drop week 1. I think the Colts beat them at home. I know it's kind of a hot take, but they drop week 1, then they move to 7-1 before they lose another game to the New York Jets. I think this team's really good offensively. They're going to score a lot of points. Defensively, it's tough to say I think they did get better. I think it's a slight margin, but it's another year of Will Anderson. You bring in Danielle Hunter. Obviously, you lose Blake Cashman. That's the big one for me. That was your defensive leader. You lose him, but you bring in Azeez Al-Shaair, like we talked about. Derek Stingley, the secondary is good. I think defensively, they will do enough to keep them in games against high-scoring teams. Again, like Detroit, against high-scoring teams. Honestly, like the Chiefs, they'll do enough, and offensively, they will be able to put some points on the board too. So I do have them 11-6, 4-2 in the division, 7-1 at home, 4-5 on the road against teams with a winning record from last year, 7-6 against teams with a losing record from last year, 4-0, and 3-4 against playoff teams from last year. Without further ado, though, let's move into the middle two teams. We'll start with the Jacksonville Jaguars because I think that is the biggest point of discussion here that you guys are not ready. The Jacksonville Jaguars, guys. Full transparency, I think this is the most underrated team in the AFC because you look at them losing Calvin Ridley. You look at the collapse they had from last season. You look at everybody in their division, getting better, which they are. But the Jacksonville Jaguars also got better, right? They add Eric Armstead on the inside. They draft Brian Thomas Jr. And honestly, the way the end of last season shook out, the reason they were not as good as they were was health. And, health plays a lot of factors in every NFL season for every team. The Jacksonville Jaguars got bit by the injury bug real bad last year, and it was continuing, and it was their quarterback. perfect storm of injuries, in my opinion. I think this team, healthy, better, going into 2024, they're going to win a decent amount of games. I have them at 9-8. I have them at 7-1 at home, though. That's important to note. 7-1 at home. They take care of business at home. And looking in the division, 3-3. I think they split. We'll go through the schedule. I have their losses to Miami, their loss to the Buffalo Bills week 3. Their Bills are coming off a mini bye. Week 4, traveling to Houston. Week 9, traveling to Philly. Week 11, traveling to Detroit. Week 14, traveling to Tennessee. Week 15, hosting the Jets. And then week 18, traveling to Indy. But I have them beating some pretty good teams too. Week 2, I have them beating Cleveland at home. That's their home opener. I have them beating the Colts, the Bears, Patriots. I have them beating the Packers at home week 8. I have them beating the Vikings. I have them beating Houston again week 13. Titans, the Raiders. They lose games to really good teams, and I think that's the reality of the Jaguars are. I don't think they're a playoff team, but I think they're much better than people give them credit for. But they're good enough to take care of business against teams that really shouldn't be competing with them, like against the teams with the losing record from last year, 4-1, but against teams with the winning record from last year, 5-7. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are a good team. I think people throw them to the side. I've seen some people even putting them last in this division, but I think Jacksonville Jaguars are a good team, a team that not a lot of people give enough credit for, but I think this team will win 9 games. They'll lose 8 games, 9-8, finishing, as my standings have it, 10th in the AFC, so not a playoff team. We're going to move to the Indianapolis Colts, and I think you guys are also going to disagree with a lot of things I'm going to say. The Indianapolis Colts are a team where if they reach their upside and their potential, genuinely could win this division. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if Anthony Richardson played out of his mind. Adonai Mitchell was awesome. This draft class they brought in, especially defensively, had a huge impact, but it's so much easier said than done. I think health also plays a huge part in this team. But again, week 1, I have them beating Houston, traveling to Green Bay week 2, losing, hosting Chicago and Pittsburgh in back-to-back weeks, winning both of those games, traveling to Jacksonville week 5, dropping that one, traveling to Tennessee week 6, winning, hosting Miami off of a bye week 7. I have them winning that game, traveling to Houston week 8. I have the Texans traveling to Minnesota week 9, Minnesota off a mini bye, but I do have the Colts winning that game, hosting Buffalo week 10. I have the Bills traveling to New York, the Jets week 11. I have the Jets hosting the Lions week 12. I have the Lions week 13 traveling to New England. I have the Colts. Week 14 is their bye. Week 15, it gets a little sketchy. They travel to Denver off the bye. I think that's a game that the Broncos win. I think the Colts drop that game. That could prove week 15 to be enormous in the playoff push. I think the Broncos win that game. They host the Titans the week after. They beat them. They travel to New York. The Giants, they beat them. And then week 18, the way the schedule works out, Jacksonville will be traveling to Indy, at least in my prediction, pretty much for a wild card spot. But the Colts play their starters. They kick their division rivals out of the playoffs. I have the Colts winning in week 18. So that puts them at 9-8 against teams with a winning record, 4-7, against teams with a losing record from last season, 5-1, 1-5 versus playoff teams from last year, 4-2 in the division, 6-6 in the conference. I have them 9th in the AFC. I think the Colts can do a lot of really good things. I think a lot hinges on the upside. I think a lot hinges on health. If they stay healthy again, they can make the playoffs. They could even win the division, but I'm not going to fully bank on that. At least as of right now, I have them at 9-8. So as the entire AFC South shakes out, we have the Houston Texans up top at 11-6, the Indianapolis Colts based off of division tiebreaker at 9-8, one spot above the Jacksonville Jaguars, who also finish at 9-8, then the Tennessee Titans at 5-12. I think this is going to be a really fun division to watch. There's going to be an entertaining brand of football played by all 4 of these teams. There's going to be a lot of points scored by all 4 of these teams. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to whose defense is the best. I think it's the Houston Texans. I don't think it's particularly close. We wait to see as the season goes on. But I appreciate you guys tuning into this newest episode of 3-Point Lead. Again, if you're new, make sure you subscribe, like the video, follow if you're listening on Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, whatever it may be. And I will see you guys next time. God bless.